The cellar door in our house was made of oak, and it had a wooden bar that dropped into an iron bracket on the outside. I know the exact sound that bar made when it fell into place, because I heard it from the wrong side. I was 19 years old, sitting on a dirt floor in the dark, and above me I could hear my father's chair scrape back from the supper table, my mother saying grace as if nothing had happened, and the ordinary clink of forks against plates. My family ate their meal while I sat below them in the cold, and the worst part, the part I have never been able to explain to anyone who did not grow up the way I did, is that none of us thought it was strange. Not my mother, not my brothers. And in that moment, God forgive me, not even me. Before I tell you what I did to end up down there and what happened over the 11 Sundays that followed, I need you to understand one thing. In my world, my father had not broken a single rule. Not one. There was no law he violated, no line he crossed. Everything he did to me that autumn was permitted, and that is the part I need you to carry with you through this whole story. My name is Anna. I grew up Old Order Amish, and I was a grown woman before I ever heard the word that describes what was done to me. This is the channel where I finally say out loud the things my community spent a lifetime teaching me to swallow. If you want the truth about Amish life from someone who actually lived it, not the postcard version they sell to the tourists on the roadside, subscribe and tap the like button. And in the comments, tell me one word for the strictest rule you grew up with. I read every single one. Let me take you back and explain how a father comes to lock his own daughter beneath the kitchen floor and then sleeps soundly in his own bed that same night. I was not a young girl when this happened. Understand that. The stories people tell about the Amish are always about teenagers, about courtship and singings and bundling. But I was 19 going on 20, and in my church district that was already late. My younger sister was married. 2 of my closest friends were married with a child, each on the hip. And a woman who is not married by 20 in an Old Order community is not simply single. She is a question. She is a worry whispered about in the kitchen after church. She is quietly a kind of failure, and everyone in the family carries the weight of it, most of all the father. Because here is what people outside the community do not understand. An Amish father is not only the head of his household, he is accountable to the church for it. The bishop looks at him. The ministers look at him. The other men look at him across the barn at every gathering. When his daughter will not marry, will not yield, will not take the sensible path that has been laid out for her, that is not treated as her private business. It is treated as his failure to govern. And a man will do a great deal to avoid being seen as a man who cannot govern his own house. The rules that shaped everything were unwritten. We called it the Ordnung, the order, and it was never printed in any book you could hold in your hand. You learned it by absorbing it the way you learn the weather. A daughter obeys her father until she passes into the keeping of a husband. A father is responsible for her very soul until then. Discipline was not cruelty. Discipline was love. That was said so often and so plainly from the pulpit and the kitchen table alike, that I believed it long after I had every reason on earth not to. The man I would not marry was named Amos. He was 34. I was 19. He had a farm free of debt, 200 acres, a good dairy herd, and a first wife 3 years in the ground, and no children from her. He needed a young wife who could give him sons and run a household. And by every measure my community used to weigh such things. He was a tremendous match. Better than a girl like me had any right to expect, they said. That was said to me more than once, and always as if it settled the matter entirely, as if my own feelings were simply not one of the things being weighed. I did not want him. I cannot give you a dramatic reason. He was not cruel that I knew of. He did not drink. He was simply a man I felt nothing for, a man old enough to be closer to my father's world than to mine, and something in me went cold and still every single time I imagined a lifetime inside his house. I had no word then for what I felt. I know now it was the most basic thing a person can feel. It was refusal. My whole body refused him, and I had never once in my life been taught that my body's refusal was a thing that counted for anything at all. The first time I told my father no, we were in the barn. I remember the smell of the cows and the sound of the milk hitting the side of the pail, because I have noticed that the worst moments of my life always come with a smell attached to them. He did not shout. My father almost never shouted. He simply stopped, set down the pail, and looked at me the way you look at a fence that has come loose, something to be fixed before it causes real trouble. You will think on it, he said, that was all. And I understood, standing there in the straw, that in his mind my no was not an answer at all. It was only a delay before the yes he had already decided was coming. Now, before I take you down those cellar steps, I have to tell you what I have come to understand about the machinery I was caught inside, because it took me years and a great deal of help to see it clearly. There were 3 things holding that door shut, and none of them were the wooden bar. The first was that in my community, a woman's refusal had no standing. None at all. A girl could say no to a specific boy at a singing yes. That much was allowed, and people point to it and say, see, they had a choice. But a grown daughter refusing a suitable match her own father favored, refusing repeatedly, refusing with her whole heart, that was not treated as a preference to be respected. It was treated as rebellion to be corrected. The difference between a choice and a rebellion was simply whether the men above you happened to agree with it. The second thing was that suffering was holy. I was raised to believe that hardship borne quietly was the truest proof of faith there was. Gelassenheit, we called it, a yielding, a submission of your own will to God's, which in daily practice always meant to the will of the men who spoke for God. A woman who suffered and stayed silent was righteous. A woman who suffered and complained was proud, and pride was the oldest sin there was. So when I suffered, I had been trained from the cradle to suspect that the suffering itself was my own fault, sent to correct something crooked in me. And the third thing, the heaviest thing of all, was that leaving was death. Not death of the body, death of everything else. I was baptized at 18, of my own supposed free will, and baptism is a door that only opens one way. To leave the church after baptism is to be placed under the ban, to be shunned, cut off from your mother, your father, your table, your whole world in a single stroke. So when my father dropped that bar into its bracket, he was not truly the one holding the door shut. The entire structure of my life was. He was only the hand on the wood. I refused Amos 3 times over one autumn. After the 3rd time on a Sunday evening, my father told me to go down to the cellar and think about where my stubbornness would lead me, and to the family it would bring. And I went. That is the thing people cannot understand. I went down the steps myself. He did not drag me. He did not raise a hand. I walked down into the dark on my own 2 feet, because a lifetime of obedience walks a person down stairs that no lock ever could. Then I heard the bar drop. The cellar was where we kept the root vegetables and the canned goods, the potatoes and beets in their wooden bins, the jars of tomatoes and beans that my mother and I had put up together, with our own hands that very summer. It was cold. It was the particular kind of cold that comes up out of the bare earth and settles into your spine and stays there. There was no light once the sun went down, only a thin gray line under the door, and then after a while not even that. I sat on an overturned crate. I listened to my family finish their supper above me, the scrape of chairs, the murmur of ordinary talk, and I waited for someone up there to decide that I had learned my lesson. The first time, it was one night. I want to stop here because I know exactly how this sounds to you, hearing it now from where you are sitting. I know that everything in you wants the story to be that I screamed, that I pounded my fists on that door, that I raged against the injustice of it all through the night. I did not, and I need you to sit with why, because that is the real story, the one underneath the story. I did not rage, because I did not yet believe I had been wronged. I believed I was being corrected. I believed, sitting on that crate in the dark, that the coldness in my body toward Amos was the sin, and that the cellar was the cure, and that if I were only a better daughter, a more faithful woman, I would come back up those steps able to say yes, and to mean it with my whole heart. I prayed down there, on the dirt floor, in the black cold. I prayed to be changed into someone who wanted what I was supposed to want. That is what breaks my heart now, all these years later. Not the cold, not the dark, not the hunger, the prayers. I prayed for God to help my captors finish the work. What happened over the next 11 Sundays, I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I finally wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and pinned in the first comment, because it did not stop at one night. That is what I need you to understand about how this kind of thing works. When one night did not change me, there was another Sunday and then another. And the terrible logic of it was this. Every time I came back up those steps still unwilling, still cold, it was taken not as evidence that the method was wrong, but as proof that I had not yet suffered enough. My endurance was never read as strength. It was read as stubbornness that required a firmer hand. The very faith that let me survive the dark was the exact same thing that kept sending me back down into it, again and again, Sunday after Sunday, all through that long autumn. I will tell you about the second time, because the first time you can almost explain away, and the second is where I understood what my life had become. It was the following Sunday. I had come up from that first night, and I had washed my face, and I had gone about the week, and I had prayed. And still, when my father asked me at the end of it whether I had come to my senses about Amos, I heard my own voice say no. It was barely a whisper. It surprised even me. And this time there was no talk, no fence, no you will think on it. He simply looked at the cellar door, and then he looked at me, and I walked to it and opened it myself and went down. I did his work for him. That is what obedience does to a person. It teaches you to carry out your own punishment so that the one who orders it never has to feel the weight of his own hand. That second night was longer. The cold had a way of getting worse the more nights you spent in it. as though the earth remembered you and pulled harder. I remember I found an old horse blanket folded on a shelf among the jars, and I wrapped it around my shoulders, and it smelled of dust and animal and summer, and I held it, and I was grateful for it. And then I hated myself for being grateful, because being grateful meant I was already learning to survive this instead of learning to refuse it. That is the quiet violence of it, not the door. The way the door teaches you to make yourself smaller so that it hurts a little less next time. My mother knew. I have to say that plainly, though it cost me something every time. She stood at the top of those steps and she said nothing, because in our world a wife does not overrule her husband on the discipline of the house, not even for her own daughter, not even for the child she carried. I do not fully blame her. I have tried to over the years, and I cannot make it hold. She was locked in a cellar of her own that had no door and no steps, and no bar you could ever hear drop. She had been raised exactly as I was being raised. She had, I am nearly certain of it, said yes to my father once with the very same cold stillness I felt toward Amos. And she had spent an entire lifetime learning to call that stillness peace. What she wanted for me was the only safety she had ever known. She wanted me to yield because she truly believed that yielding was the one road that did not end in ruin. And by every measure of her world, she was not even wrong. I did not marry Amos. I want to be careful telling you how it actually ended, because it is not the triumphant escape you might be hoping for. There was no dramatic night, no lantern, no running through the fields toward freedom. What happened was quieter and stranger and sadder than that. Amos himself withdrew his suit. Word had reached him, as word always does in a community that small, that the girl was difficult, that there had been trouble in the home, and a practical farming man does not want a wife who has to be kept in a cellar to be made agreeable. He found another girl, younger than me, willing, and he married her before the next winter came. My refusal did not free me. His convenience did. I was not rescued by anyone's mercy, and least of all by my own community's. I was simply, in the end, no longer worth the trouble it would take to break me. And do you know what that felt like, to be set free that way? It did not feel like victory. It felt like shame, deep and lasting. For years afterward, I was known as the girl who could not be married off. The one there had been trouble with. And I carried that name through a community where a woman's entire worth was measured by the household she ran and the children she raised. My father never once spoke of the cellar again. Not to me, not to anyone. Not to apologize, not to explain. In his own mind, there was simply nothing to explain. He had done what a father was permitted, even expected to do. He had governed his house as best he could. That the governing had failed was, if anything, one more disappointment that I had caused him. I left for good when I was 31. It took me that long to walk out a door that had no bar on it at all. And the price was exactly what I had always been told it would be, to the letter. The letters I sent home came back unopened, my own handwriting staring up at me. My mother's voice on the rare phone call I could reach her at went flat and careful, the voice of a stranger. My father's silence toward me was total and permanent, and it lasted until the day he died, which I learned about 3 full weeks after the funeral, from a cousin in a short letter that did not think to invite me. In therapy, years later, I sat across from a quiet woman who listened to all of it, the barn and the pail and the bar dropping and the 11 Sundays, And when I was finally done, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said something I have carried with me every single day since. She said, "Anna, that was not discipline. That was a child being taught that her own no meant nothing." And I wept right there in that chair, because I was in my 40s by then, and it was the first time in my whole life that anyone had told me the coldness I had felt toward Amos was never the sin. The coldness had been the last true thing left in me that still knew it belonged to itself. I learned words down there in that ordinary outside world that I could never have imagined needing: coercion, consent, autonomy. The simple idea that a no does not require a reason to be valid, that it is complete all on its own, that a father's love, however sincere, however frightened, does not give him the right to lock that no away in the dark until it changes its mind. I do not hate my father. I want to say that plainly because I know some of you are waiting for me to say the opposite. He was a frightened man, doing what frightened men in his world had always done, terrified of a bishop's judgment and of a daughter he could not govern, wielding the only tools his faith had ever placed in his hands. And the Amish world gave me real things too. A community with a depth most people out here will never know. Hands that showed up for every harvest and every funeral without being asked. A faith that, wounded as it is, I have still not entirely thrown away. But there is no scripture that consecrates a locked door. There is no God I can believe in who fashioned a woman's own will and then required her father to starve it out of her in the cold and the dark. Discipline that must be hidden beneath the floorboards, that the whole family eats its supper directly over in complete silence, is not discipline at all. It is control that has simply learned to call itself love. If you grew up in a place where your no was treated as a problem to be solved instead of an answer to be respected, I see you. If you were ever made to believe that your own refusal was the sin, that being unwilling was proof of something broken and crooked inside you, hear me now. You were not broken. You were the last true thing in the whole house. Tell me in the comments what part of this stayed with you. Tell me your own story if you are ready to tell it. And if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to this channel, because there is so much that I have not yet said. The Sundays. What 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and pinned in the first comment. The morning is yours if you decide it is.